Every morning, long before the sun peeked over the rooftops of the old city, he was already there. He didn't arrive with fanfare or even with shoes on his feet, just bare soles, cracked and dusty from the walk, and a thin shawl draped over his shoulders that had seen better decades. He moved slowly, like someone carrying more than just the weight of his own body. The temple gates hadn't even opened yet, but the guards knew him. They'd nod quietly as he settled onto the cool stone step near the entrance, tucking his legs beneath him like a man used to waiting. Inside, the air smelled of incense, wet marigolds, and the faint metallic tang of the brass bells that chimed with every devotee's prayer. Outside, the world was still asleep, except for him. He'd sit there for hours, eyes closed, lips barely moving, whispering words only he and the gods seemed to hear. He never held out a hand. Never asked for anything, not even when his stomach growled so loudly it echoed in the quiet dawn. People passed by, pilgrims with folded hands, shopkeepers unrolling their shutters, schoolchildren skipping toward class, but few noticed him. To most, he was just another old man in a city full of them. Some mistook him for a sadhu, one of those wandering holy men who renounced the world. But he wasn't. He'd once worn pressed shirts and polished shoes. He'd stood in front of chalkboards, not temple doors, teaching children how to read, how to add numbers, how to be kind. Now all that was behind him. His wife had gone first, taken by a fever that moved faster than the village doctor could run. After that, the house felt too big, too empty. His son, the only child he'd ever known, had left years ago for a job overseas. At first, letters came, thick envelopes with photos of tall buildings and promises. "I'll send money soon, Papa. I'll bring you here one day." But the letters grew thinner, then stopped altogether. The phone calls became rare, then non-existent. Maybe life got busy. Maybe the son forgot, or maybe remembering hurt too much. Whatever the reason, the old man stopped waiting. He sold what little he had left, the cot, the wooden trunk, the framed photo of his wedding day, and moved into a tiny room near the riverbank. But even that became too much when the rent rose and his pension, what little there was, ran dry. One rainy night, with nowhere else to go, he walked to the temple, not to beg, just to sit, to be near something that still felt sacred. The priest didn't turn him away. They couldn't. There was something in the way he bowed his head, not in submission but in quiet respect, that made them pause. One young priest, no older than 25, began leaving a small bowl of prasad near the step each morning. Sometimes it was sweet rice, sometimes a piece of fruit, sometimes just a handful of roasted gram. The old man never took it right away. He'd wait until the priest had gone back inside, then eat slowly, deliberately, as if each bite were a prayer. One particularly cold morning, the priest stayed behind. He watched from the archway as the old man lifted the bowl with trembling fingers. His hand shook, not from age alone, but from hunger. His ribs pressed against his skin like the frame of a half-built house. When he brought the food to his mouth, his eyes closed, and for a moment, his whole body seemed to sigh in relief. The priest's throat tightened. Later that day, he asked the head priest about the man. "Who is he?" The older priest sighed. "He used to teach in the village school near Sarnath. Retired 20 years ago. No family here. No one comes for him. He eats only what we give, sometimes less. If we're busy or forget, he doesn't remind us, he just sits." That night, the young priest couldn't sleep. He kept seeing those hands, thin, veined, holding that bowl like it was a gift from heaven. And maybe it was. But it wasn't enough. The next morning, he brought not just prasad, but a warm cup of milk and 2 thick rotis wrapped in a clean cloth. He placed them gently beside the old man and sat down a few feet away, not speaking, just being there. After a long silence, the old man looked up. His eyes were cloudy with age, but sharp with understanding. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice rough like dry leaves. "I know," the priest replied, "but I want to." A small nod. Then the old man ate. Word began to spread quietly among the temple staff. Someone started leaving an extra blanket on the step during winter nights. Another brought a pair of worn but sturdy sandals. No one made a show of it. There were no speeches, no photos posted. Just small acts offered in silence, received with equal quiet. Still, the hunger never fully left him. Some days he'd sit with his eyes closed longer than usual, swaying slightly as if fighting dizziness. On those days, the priest would whisper among themselves, worried. But the old man never complained. He believed suffering was part of life, something to endure, not escape. What he didn't know was that someone had finally really seen him, not just as a fixture of the temple steps, not as a ghost of the past, but as a person whole, worthy, and deeply human, that someone would change everything. But for now, as the first rays of sun touched the temple spire and the bells began to chime for morning arti, the old man sat where he always did still, patient and alone in a crowd of believers. He didn't know that his story was about to ripple far beyond these stone walls. He didn't know that kindness, once noticed, has a way of multiplying. All he knew was the warmth of the sun on his face, the taste of yesterday's prasad still sweet on his tongue, and the quiet hope that today, too, someone might remember to leave a little food by the step. And in that simple hope, there was dignity, there was grace, and there was the first, fragile thread of a miracle yet to unfold. She hadn't come to the temple looking for a story. She'd come for the light, the way it spilled over the Ganges at sunrise, turning the water gold, the way it caught in the smoke of morning rituals and made everything feel like a dream. She carried a small camera, not the fancy kind with big lenses, but one that fit in her palm and recorded truth without pretense. She'd spent weeks walking the ghats, filming widows in white saris whispering prayers, boatmen rowing silently through mist, children chasing pigeons near ancient shrines. Her project wasn't about grand events. It was about quiet lives lived fully, even when no one was watching. That's how she saw him, not as a beggar, not as background noise, but as a man who sat with his back straight even when his body begged to slump. She noticed how he never reached for the prasad left near him until the priest had turned away, as if accepting kindness required privacy. She saw how his eyes followed the sparrows that hopped near his feet, how his fingers sometimes traced the carvings on the temple step, like he was reading a story only he remembered. On her third morning at the temple, she brought 2 cups of hot tea from the stall down the lane, one for herself, one for him. She didn't say much at first, just sat a few feet away sipping her tea, letting the silence do the talking. After a while, he glanced at her, not suspiciously, just curiously, like a stray dog wondering if the hand held food or a stone. "You come here often?" he finally asked, voice low and rough. "Lately, yes," she said. "The light is beautiful." He nodded slowly. "It is, especially when it hits the shivling inside. Makes the stone look alive," she smiled. "You notice things." "I used to teach children to notice things," he said. Then, as if he'd said too much, he fell quiet again. But she didn't push. She just came back the next day, and the next. Sometimes with tea, sometimes with a piece of fruit, sometimes with nothing but her presence, slowly like water seeping into dry earth. Trust began to grow. One morning, as a cold wind swept through the courtyard, he wrapped his shawl tighter and said, almost to himself, "I never thought I'd be sitting here like this." She didn't answer right away, just waited. "My wife," he began, then paused, swallowed. "She used to say I worried too much about others. Even when we had little, I'd give half our meal to a neighbor's child. She'd scold me, then laugh, then pack extra rice anyway." His eyes grew distant. "Now, there's no one to scold me. Or laugh." She felt a lump in her throat but kept her voice steady. "Your son? He lives far away. Sends messages sometimes. Says he's busy. I believe him. He didn't sound bitter, just tired. I don't need much. A roof, a meal, but dignity. That's harder to keep when you're hungry." She looked at him, really looked. Saw the pride beneath the weariness, the teacher still in him even now. Without thinking, she lifted her camera, not to intrude but to honor. "Would it be all right if I filmed you? Just for a moment? Not for show. Just so I don't forget what real strength looks like." He studied her face, then gave the smallest nod. She recorded less than a minute. Just him sitting, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees, the morning light warming his face. No music, no narration, just the sound of temple bells and distant footsteps. That night, back in her rented room, she watched the clip over and over. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. But it was true. And in a world full of noise, truth felt rare. On a whim, she posted it online. Just a short caption. "This man prays while starving. Does anyone see him?" She didn't expect much. Maybe a few likes from friends, a comment or two. But by morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Hundreds of messages poured in, some angry, some heartbroken, many asking, "Where is he? Can we help?" Strangers shared the video with their families, their coworkers, their social circles. A local news blogger picked it up. A doctor offered free checkups. Retired teacher wrote, "I know that look. That's the look of someone who gave everything and got nothing back." Within 2 days, the video had been seen by over 200,000 people. She was overwhelmed. She hadn't wanted fame for herself or for him. She'd only wanted someone to see him. But now that they had, she couldn't ignore the wave of goodwill crashing toward them. She went back to the temple early the next day, heart pounding. Would he be angry? Would he feel exposed? He was sitting in his usual spot, but something was different. His posture was a little straighter. His eyes a little brighter. "You posted that?" he asked gently before she could speak. She nodded, guilt flickering in her chest. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." He held up a hand. "Don't be sorry." For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a burden, not as a ghost, just as a person. Relief washed over her. "But," he added, "if people want to help, don't let them just throw money at me like I'm a problem to fix. Let them remember, I was someone's teacher, someone's husband, someone who mattered." She promised she would. That afternoon, she set up a simple donation page, not for him alone, but to support elders in the area who'd fallen through the cracks. She listed only basic needs: food, medicine, safe shelter. No grand promises, no emotional manipulation, just facts, told with care. Donations started coming in. 50 rupees from a student, 500 from a shopkeeper, 10,000 from a stranger who wrote, "My grandfather looked just like him. I wish I'd done more." But the most surprising message came from a man who signed only as a former student. He wrote, "I think I know who this is. If it's the man who taught at the village school near Sarnath in the 80s. He saved my life. I was a troublemaker. He stayed after school every day to help me read. Told me I was smart even when I failed. I became an engineer because of him. Please tell me it's him." She showed the message to the old man, his eyes filled with tears. "Vikram?" he whispered. "Is that you?" He hadn't recognized the name at first, it had been so long. But then he remembered. A boy with messy hair and a stubborn streak, always late, always hungry, always trying to prove he wasn't worthless. "Yes," the man replied when she messaged back. "It's me. What happened next?" Wasn't just about one man's hunger anymore. It was about memory, about gratitude that had been waiting, decades to be spoken, and about how one quiet act of noticing by a stranger with a camera could wake up a whole chain of kindness that had been sleeping, just waiting for a reason to rise. The old man didn't know it yet, but his story was no longer his alone. Belonged to everyone who had ever been forgotten, and everyone who refused to let them stay that way. The message from the former student didn't just sit in the filmmaker's inbox, it sparked something. At first it was just one voice, but that voice reached out to another, and that one called a third. Soon a quiet chain of memory began to stir across towns and cities, like ripples from a single pebble dropped into still water. The man who'd written, now a retired army officer living in Dehradun, couldn't stop thinking about his old teacher. He remembered the way the man had stayed behind after school, patiently sounding out letters with him when everyone else had given up. He remembered the day he'd shown up with torn shoes and how the teacher had quietly slipped him a new pair the next morning, saying only, "Your feet should carry you far." He hadn't thanked him properly. Not then. Not ever. Now, seeing that frail figure on the temple steps, same gentle eyes, same quiet strength, he felt a deep ache in his chest. Not guilt, exactly. More like a debt of the heart that had gone unpaid for too long. He didn't just send money to the donation page. He picked up the phone. First, he called the classmate who now ran a small hospital in Lucknow. Then the one who managed a grocery chain in Kanpur. Then the woman who'd become a school principal in Patna. She'd been in the same class, always sitting in the front row, always raising her hand. One by one, he told them, "Remember him? The one who believed in us when no one else did?" Their voices softened. Memories flooded back of chalk dust and summer heat, of failing a test and being told, "Try again. I know you can." Of being seen not for what they lacked, but for what they could become. Within days, a group chat formed, not for gossip or jokes, but for planning. "We can't just send money," said the hospital owner. "He needs care. Real care. And dignity," added the principal. "Not pity, respect." The retired officer nodded even though they couldn't see him. "He taught us to stand tall. Now it's our turn to make sure he can." But they wanted to do more than help one man. They remembered how, back in school, their teacher always shared his lunch with the hungriest child. How he'd walk miles to visit a sick student's home. How he never turned anyone away. If he cared for all of us, the grocer said, then we should care for others like him. And so the idea grew, not just a gift, but a gesture. Not just help, but honor. They decided on a convoy. Not flashy, not for show, but meaningful. Vehicles filled with essentials, rice, lentils, cooking oil, warm blankets, medicine. Enough to last not just the old man, but the temple staff and nearby elders who also struggled in silence. And at the center of it all, something more personal. A small house, modest but clean, freshly painted with a courtyard and a cot and a lock on the door. His own space, his own peace. They pooled their savings, called in favors, even convinced a local builder to finish the repairs at cost. No one complained. In fact, people kept adding to the list. Put in a pressure cooker. Don't forget winter quilts. Get him good slippers. The soft kind. While this was happening, the old man knew nothing of it. He still sat on the temple step each morning, still ate the prasad with quiet gratitude, still waved away offers of more. The filmmaker visited often, bringing updates on the donations, but she didn't mention the convoy. She wanted it to be a surprise, not for drama, but because she sensed he wouldn't believe it until he saw it with his own eyes. Meanwhile, the story kept spreading. A local radio station played a short segment about the teacher on the temple steps. A school in Rajasthan held a collection drive, children donating their pocket money, writing little notes that said, "Thank you for teaching others." Even a few tourists, after hearing about him, left envelopes of cash with the priests, asking only that it go to the man who sits and prays. But the real magic was happening quietly, in phone calls and WhatsApp messages, in garages being cleaned out and trucks being checked, in hearts remembering what it felt like to be believed in. One evening, the retired officer stood in his garage, packing sacks of rice into the back of his old Jeep. His wife watched from the doorway. "You're really doing this?" she asked softly. "I have to," he said. "He gave me my future. The least I can do is give him some comfort now." She didn't argue. She went inside and came back with a bundle of hand-knitted shawls. "For him," she said, "and for anyone else who's cold." The day before the convoy was set to leave, the group held a final call. Over 20 people now, former students, neighbors, even strangers, moved by the story. They agreed on a date, a route, a time. "We'll arrive at sunrise," the officer said. Just like he's always there at sunrise. There was a pause. Then someone said, "What if he doesn't recognize us?" Another voice answered, "It doesn't matter. We recognize him." Back at the temple, the old man had no idea his life was about to change. He'd been feeling weaker lately. The cold had settled deep in his bones, and some mornings it took him 3 tries to stand up. But he never missed a day. He told himself it was discipline. But deep down, it was hope. The quiet, stubborn kind that keeps a person going even when the world seems to have moved on. That night he dreamed of his classroom. The smell of chalk, the sound of children laughing. He woke before dawn, as always, and walked slowly to the temple. The stars were still out. The streets were empty. He sat down on his step, wrapped his shawl tight, and closed his eyes. Somewhere, engines were being started. Keys turned. Doors shut. A convoy of gratitude was rolling toward him. Not because he asked, but because someone finally remembered to say thank you. The morning air was crisp, the kind that carries the scent of wood smoke and river mist. The temple bells hadn't even begun their first chime when the old man settled onto his usual step. He pulled his shawl tighter, his breath forming small clouds in the cold. As always, he sat with his eyes closed, not in sleep, but in stillness, a habit from decades of early mornings and quiet reflection. He didn't hear the distant hum at first. It started as a low rumble, like thunder rolling in from far away. But there were no clouds, just the pale pink sky and the first birds stirring in the banyan trees. Then the sound grew clearer, engines. Not one or two, but many. Steady, purposeful. People on the street stopped walking. Shopkeepers paused while unrolling their shutters. Even the temple priests came to the gate, squinting down the narrow lane. Around the bend they appeared. First came a vintage army jeep, its olive green paint faded but proud, hood polished to a shine. Behind it, a pickup truck loaded with sacks of rice and lentils. Then a white van with a red cross painted on the side, medicine, bandages, vitamins. Another truck carried folded cots and thick woolen quilts, and at the very back an old ambulance. Not for emergencies, but repurposed as a mobile pantry, its back doors open to reveal shelves of cooking oil, sugar, tea, and tins of milk. Every vehicle was decorated, not with banners or slogans, but with marigold garlands and saffron cloth tied to the mirrors. Simple, respectful, human. The convoy slowed as it reached the temple gate. Engines idled. Doors opened. Out stepped men and women in their 50s and 60s, some in simple kurtas, others in retired military uniforms, a few in doctor's coats or school sweaters worn soft with age. They didn't rush. They walked slowly, almost reverently, toward the temple steps. And then they saw him. The old man had opened his eyes now, confused, blinking as if he weren't sure he was awake. He tried to stand, but his legs trembled. One of the younger priests gently held his shoulder, whispering, "It's all right. Just stay seated." At the front of the group, a tall man with silver hair and a straight posture stepped forward. His eyes, sharp yet soft, locked onto the old man's face. He didn't speak at first, just looked, like he was seeing not just the frail body before him, but the man behind it, the one who'd once stood at a chalkboard, patient and firm, shaping futures with quiet words. Then, without hesitation, the man knelt, not in show, not for photos, but in the oldest gesture of respect in their culture. He touched the old man's feet. A murmur went through the crowd. Some wiped their eyes. Others bowed their heads. "You taught me how to read," the man said, voice thick. "You told me I wasn't stupid even when I failed every test. You walked me home in the rain when I had no shoes. You believed in me when no one else did." He looked up, tears glistening. "I never got to thank you properly. But today we're here to say it together." He stood and turned to the group behind him. "This is the man who gave us our dignity. Now it's our turn to give him his peace." One by one they came forward, not all at once but in quiet turns. A woman placed a warm shawl over his shoulders. A doctor knelt beside him, checking his pulse with gentle hands. A man in a grocery apron set down a basket of fresh fruit and milk. Another handed the head priest a thick envelope. Rent for the new house, paid for a full year. Then came the most unexpected gift. From the back of the jeep, two men carefully carried a small wooden box. Inside was a brass key on a red thread, and the deed to a little house just 3 streets away near a quiet lane with neem trees and a view of the temple spire. It had running water, a small kitchen, a bed with a proper mattress, and a lock on the door. No one would have to sleep on stone again. The old man couldn't speak. His hand shook as he held the key. He looked from face to face, searching for recognition. Some he remembered. The boy with the crooked smile, the girl who always asked too many questions. Others were strangers, but their eyes held the same warmth, the same gratitude. I didn't do anything special," he finally whispered. "You saw us," someone said. That was everything. The temple courtyard, usually so quiet at dawn, now hummed with soft voices, shared tears, and the clinking of pots being unloaded. Children from nearby homes gathered at the edge, wide-eyed, watching kindness in action. Even the stray dogs seemed to sense something sacred was happening. They lay quietly, tails thumping. A small table was set up under the banyan tree. Hot tea was poured. Rotas were shared. No speeches. No cameras. The filmmaker had left hers in her bag. This wasn't for recording, but for living. Just people, reconnecting across time, bound by a single thread, a teacher who never stopped caring. As the sun rose higher, painting the temple walls gold, the old man sat not alone, but surrounded. Not as a beggar on a step, but as an honored elder, a guide, a living memory of what goodness looks like when it's practiced quietly, day after day. Later, when the crowd began to thin and the vehicles were nearly unloaded, the retired officer sat beside him on the step, the same step where he'd sat hungry for so long. "Will you move into the house today?" he asked gently. The old man looked toward the lane where the little home waited. Then back at the temple, his sanctuary for so many lonely months. Maybe tomorrow, he said with a small smile. Today, today I just want to sit here and feel this. And so he did. Not in silence this time, but in the quiet company of those who finally came back to say, "We see you. We remember you. You mattered then and you matter now." The convoy would leave by afternoon, but what it left behind wasn't just supplies or a house. It left proof that no act of kindness is ever truly forgotten, and that sometimes, decades later, it comes back, not as debt, but as love. The old man moved into the little house 3 days after the convoy left. Not because he was eager to leave the temple, he'd grown used to its quiet rhythm, but because the neighbors began stopping by with plates of food, and the children started leaving drawings on his doorstep. And one evening, a young mother brought her feverish son to his gate, saying, "They told me you used to help sick children. Can you look at him?" He couldn't say no, so he opened his door, and in doing so, opened his life again. The house was simple: white walls, a clay-tiled roof, a small courtyard where he planted marigolds from seeds given by the temple gardener. But it felt like a palace because it was his. No one rushed him out at closing time. No cold stone beneath him at night. Just peace and the soft sound of wind through the neem leaves. Still, he returned to the temple every morning, not to sit hungry on the step, but to sit with purpose, because something unexpected had happened after the convoy came. People started noticing others. A shopkeeper began leaving extra bread for the elderly woman who swept streets. A schoolteacher started checking on a retired tailor who lived alone. Even the temple priests, inspired by what they'd witnessed, began setting aside a portion of daily offerings, not just for rituals, but for anyone in need. Someone suggested they start a small kitchen, just a pot of dal and rice each afternoon served under the banyan tree. The old man agreed to oversee it, not as a boss, but as a quiet presence. He didn't cook, but he greeted everyone who came: widows, laborers, wandering monks, even stray dogs who lingered near the edge of the courtyard. He'd ask how they slept, if their cough had lessened, whether their children had written. People began calling it the grandfather's kitchen. Donations kept coming, not in huge amounts, but steadily. A bag of onions from a farmer, a sack of flour from a mill owner, a box of medicines from a pharmacist who'd seen the original video. None of it was flashy. None of it was for fame. It was just neighbors helping neighbors, sparked by one man's quiet dignity. A local college student started volunteering, then brought friends. Soon a group of young people came every Sunday to serve food, clean the area, and sit with the elders listening to their stories. One boy even recorded the old man telling folk tales, just for his family, not for the internet. The old man never asked for any of this, but he accepted it with grace, always saying, "Kindness is like a seed. You plant it once and it grows in places you never expected." Years passed. His steps grew slower, his hands more fragile, but his eyes stayed bright. He still wore the same thin shawl, though now it was clean and mended with care. And every morning, without fail, he walked to the temple, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Tourists sometimes asked about him. "Who is that man?" They'd whisper, pointing to the old figure sitting under the tree, sharing a cup of tea with a barefoot boy. The priest would smile and say, "That's the man who taught us that no one is invisible." He never gave interviews, never sought attention, but his presence became a kind of quiet landmark, like the temple itself or the river nearby. A place people came to feel grounded. One winter morning, a young couple arrived with a baby wrapped in a red shawl. They approached him shyly. "Our parents were your students," the man said. "They told us to find you, to show you this." He held out the child. The old man's eyes filled with tears. He reached out a trembling hand and gently touched the baby's forehead, a blessing, silent and deep. "I taught your parents how to read," he said softly. "Now you teach this one how to be kind." They nodded, tears in their own eyes, and walked away with their heads held high, as if carrying something precious. He watched them go, then looked up at the rising sun. The kitchen was already bustling. Steam rose from the big pot. Laughter floated from the corner, where two old women shared stories. A young volunteer handed him a plate of warm roti and dal. "Eat, grandfather," she said with a smile. "You've got a long day ahead," he chuckled. "Every day is long when you're grateful for it." And he was. Not because his life had become easy, age still ached. Memories still stung. but because he'd learned something precious in his final years, that being seen changes everything. And that once you've been seen, you start seeing others too. The Ramu Initiative, as people began calling it, though he never liked the name, grew slowly but surely. Not into a big organization with offices and logos, but into a web of care, neighbor checking on neighbor, student helping elder, stranger sharing bread. It spread to nearby towns, not through campaigns, but through stories. Remember that teacher in Varanasi? We're doing something like that here. He never took credit. Whenever someone thanked him, he'd just say, I didn't do anything. I just sat. It was everyone else who stood up. One evening, as the sun dipped below the temple spire, the filmmaker visited. She hadn't been back in months. Her work had taken her to other places, other stories. But she'd never forgotten this one. She found him sitting in his courtyard, feeding crumbs to sparrows. You look happy, she said. He nodded, not because I have more, but because I'm not alone. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then she asked, what do you think changed that day, the convoy, the video, the donations? He thought for a long time. Then he said, none of that changed me. What changed was that someone finally looked at me and said, you matter. And once you feel that, you start looking at others the same way. She left that night with a heart full of hope. Years later, long after he was gone, people still gather under that banyan tree. The kitchen still runs. The house is now a small community center where elders teach children old songs and math tricks. And every morning someone leaves a fresh bowl of prasad on the temple step. Not because anyone sits there hungry anymore, but as a reminder that kindness once awakened never really dies. It just finds new hands to carry it forward. And in that quiet city by the river, where the bells still chime at dawn and the light still turns the water gold, the old man's greatest lesson lives on, not in words but in action. See people, really see them, because sometimes all it takes to change a life is to notice it. The story, as most people knew it, had a quiet ending. The old man found peace, the community came together, kindness rippled outward. It felt complete, like a circle closing at sunset. But life doesn't always follow neat endings. Sometimes the most powerful chapters begin after the applause fades. A year after the convoy came and went, something small happened that no one filmed, no one posted, and no one expected to matter. It started with a boy. Not a special boy, just a thin, quiet child who lived in a one-room house near the railway tracks. His father worked loading sacks at the station. His mother stitched clothes late into the night. They weren't poor by choice, but by circumstance, the kind of family that slips through the cracks of big promises and government schemes. The boy went to school but often came hungry. He never complained. Like the old man once did, he learned to sit still, to make himself small, to wait. One afternoon, he wandered near the temple, drawn by the smell of cooking. He didn't ask for food. He just stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching as volunteers served plates of rice and dal under the banyan tree. The old man saw him right away, not because the boy stood out, but because he recognized that look, the hollow eyes, the way his shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear. He'd worn that look himself not so long ago. Without a word, the old man walked over, took an extra plate from the stack, and handed it to the boy. Eat, he said gently. There's always enough. The boy hesitated. I didn't bring anything. You brought yourself, the old man replied. That's enough. That single plate became a habit. Every day after school, the boy came. And every day, the old man made sure he got a full serving, sometimes with an extra roti tucked on the side. They never spoke much, but over time, the boy began to sit closer. Then he started helping, carrying empty plates, sweeping the courtyard, filling water glasses. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, the boy asked, "Why do you do this?" The old man didn't answer right away. He watched a sparrow land on the temple wall, then fly off again. Because once, he said slowly, someone saw me when I thought no one would, and that changed everything. The boy nodded as if he understood more than his years should allow. Months passed. The boy grew stronger. His school marks improved. He started speaking up in class. And every afternoon he returned, not just for food, but for the quiet company of a man who never asked for anything in return. Then came the rains. Heavy, relentless monsoons flooded the low-lying areas. The boy's home filled with water. His family moved to a temporary shelter under a bridge, sharing space with dozens of others. School closed. Hope felt thin, but the kitchen under the banyan tree stayed open. Volunteers brought extra blankets. The old man insisted they cook more, serve more, welcome more. When the world gets dark, he'd say, we become each other's light. One stormy afternoon, the boy arrived soaked to the skin, shivering. The old man wrapped him in a dry shawl, gave him hot tea, and let him sit by the small stove they used for cooking. Later, the boy whispered, my father says we might have to leave the city. Go to a village where his cousin lives. But I don't want to go. I'll miss this. The old man placed a hand on his shoulder. You won't lose this, he said. You'll carry it with you. How? By doing what you've seen here. By sharing what little you have. By seeing people the way you've been seen. The boy stayed in the city. His father found steadier work. And the boy? He kept coming, but he didn't just come to receive. He started bringing friends, other children from the slum near the tracks. At first they hung back, shy and wary. But the old man greeted each one by name, offered each a plate, asked each how their day was. Slowly the group grew, 10 children, then 15. They helped serve, cleaned up, even sang songs while washing dishes. The kitchen became more than a place for food. It became a home, and the old man? He became more than a teacher from the past. He became a bridge between generations, between need and care, between silence and belonging. Years later, when the boy was no longer a boy but a young man studying to be a teacher himself, he returned to that same courtyard. He wore simple clothes, carried a worn satchel, and stood where he once stood as a hungry child. Only now, he wasn't waiting for a plate. He was holding one out to another thin, quiet child who'd just arrived, eyes wide with uncertainty. Eat, the young man said, echoing words he'd never forgotten. There's always enough. And in that moment, the circle didn't just close, it expanded, because the real legacy of the old man wasn't the house, or the convoy, or even the kitchen. It was this, the quiet understanding that kindness isn't a one-time gift. It's a language, and once you learn it, you teach it, not with speeches, but with actions. Not for praise, but because it's the right thing to do. Today, if you visit that temple at dawn, you'll still see someone sitting under the banyan tree. Not the old man, he's gone now, carried gently into memory, but others who carry his spirit. The young teacher, the college volunteers, the shopkeeper who brings extra onions, the mother who brings her child to say hello, and every now and then a stranger stops, watches for a moment, and asks, what is this place? They're told it's where people remember to see each other. No statues were built, no streets were renamed, but in the hearts of those who were hungry, whether for food, for hope, or for someone to notice them, the old man's presence remains. Because the most powerful stories aren't the ones that end with a miracle. They're the ones that keep going, quietly, steadily, one act of kindness at a time, and somewhere, in a city by a sacred river, a child eats a warm meal, looks up, and feels seen, just like someone once was, just like someone always should be.